My husband's best friend, Zane, emerged from our bathroom, not with a freshly scrubbed face or a forgotten towel, but with a small, unsettlingly orange prescription bottle in his hand. His brow was furrowed with a mixture of confusion and concern as he stated, "I thought you guys were trying for a baby." My head snapped up from the glowing screen of my laptop, where I'd been meticulously comparing success rates and costs of various IVF clinics, my entire future wrapped up in those digital spreadsheets. "We are trying, Zane," I replied, my voice sharp with confusion, a tremor of frustration already present. "What on earth are you talking about?" Beside me, Jasper, my husband, froze mid-reach for his morning coffee, his hand hovering over the warm mug. A ripple of unsettling stillness spreading through the kitchen. Zane didn't back down. He simply held up the bottle, its dark orange contrasting sharply with the mundane white of the label. "Then why?" he pressed, his voice even, yet laced with accusation. "Do you have mifepristone?" "This is abortion medication. It terminates pregnancies." A nervous, disbelieving laugh bubbled out of me, brittle and fake. "That's not mine," I quickly countered, my eyes darting to Jasper, pleading with him for corroboration, for a shared denial. "I would never. Jasper, is this yours?" The silence that followed was not merely quiet. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, defeating in its profundity. Zane's gaze shifted between us, a horrifying realization slowly dawning, painting itself across his features. "There's only two people who live here," I stated, my voice barely a whisper, as Zane, with a methodical precision that chilled me to the bone, began to read the prescription label. "Filled last month, and the month before." My stomach plummeted, a nauseating freefall into a pit of dread. "My miscarriages," I breathed, the words barely audible, yet heavy with years of unspoken grief. "For miscarriages in 23 brutal months." I pushed myself up from my chair, a slow, agonizing ascent, my legs trembling so violently I feared they would buckle. The horrifying question tore from my throat, raw and disbelieving. "You've been poisoning me. You've been killing our babies." Jasper recoiled, pressing himself against the cool kitchen counter, his face draining of all color, turning a sickly gray. "It's not what you think," he stammered, his voice weak, devoid of conviction. "Then explain," I demanded, my voice beginning to rise, fueled by a searing, incredulous rage. "Explain why ovarian medication is in our house, while I'm diligently taking fertility supplements. While I jab myself daily with hormones, blaming my own body for failing us. You called out children," the words caught in my throat, breaking, ragged, each one a shard of glass. "You called out children transactions." A torrent of bitter memories flooded my mind. "Your mother called me defective at Thanksgiving, asked if maybe we should explore other options," her pitying gaze a veiled accusation. "Your sister announced her third pregnancy at Christmas," a joyous explosion that felt like a personal attack, and everyone looked at me with that suffocating, patronizing pity. My voice was spiraling higher, cracking with the weight of every sacrifice. I refused a promotion, a career-defining opportunity just to reduce stress. I gave up coffee, wine, sushi, even my anxiety medication, anything, everything, to increase the odds of carrying one of our babies to term. Jasper opened his mouth, a pathetic attempt to interject, to deflect. "The doctor said stress could, don't you dare." I shrieked, cutting him off with the force of a tidal wave. "Don't you dare quote the doctors to me now." Zane stood utterly frozen, a statue of horrified disbelief, witnessing the crumbling edifice of our life. I did 3 rounds of Clomid, I continued, each word a hammer blow that made me so violently sick I couldn't even work. "Remember, they shot dye through my fallopian tubes, searching for blockages. Do you know how much that hurts, Jasper? Do you have any idea of that searing, invasive pain? While you were poisoning me, I was letting doctors torture my body, prodding and poking, trying to find out why I couldn't stay pregnant. We named our babies," I whispered, tears finally streaming down my face, hot and relentless. "Do you remember how we picked them out together? Phoenix, Sage, Indigo, Xavier. I was knitting their tiny baby blankets, dreaming of holding them close, while you were methodically, cold-bloodedly, making sure they'd never need them." Jasper's hands were trembling violently, and in a grotesque display of self-pity, he reached out towards me, as if he were the one who needed comfort. But his gesture was met with an even starker revelation. Zane's face, already pale with shock, suddenly went whiter than a sheet. "Jasper," Zane interjected, his voice tight with a new, icy realization. "Is this about Sloan?" Jasper flinched, his face going completely ashen. "Who's Sloan?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, another piece of my world splintering. "She's nobody," Jasper mumbled, his eyes darting frantically. "Just someone from work. I saw you leaving work together late last month." Zane cut him off, his voice hardening. Each word a nail in Jasper's coffin. "You look like you were flirting." Her hand was on your neck. Jasper's face began to visibly shake, a tremor of pure panic. "When I asked you about it," Zane continued, his disappointment palpable, "you said it was a work project. I believed you because I didn't take my best friend for a cheater. But the way you're shaking now makes me doubt that." Without a second thought, I lunged, snatching Jasper's phone from the counter. "You said she's nobody." I spat, my voice raw with venom. "So you won't mind me looking?" The text conversation with Sloan loaded immediately, a digital dagger to my heart. Hearts, kiss emojis, "Can't wait until you're finally free." My hands, trembling uncontrollably, scrolled frantically upwards. "Did the insurance pay out yet?" My blood ran cold, a glacial river through my veins. "Insurance," I whispered, my voice thick with dread. I kept reading, each word a fresh wound, $8,000 this time. Same as the last three, perfect. Almost enough for the lawyer and apartment deposit. One more should do it. She wants to try again next month, perfect timing. My voice broke, shattered into a million pieces, as I read the next text aloud, the words tasting like ash, making her dead babies pay for all future. Jasper's knees buckled, not with remorse, but with a sickening wave of embarrassment. He clutched the counter, fighting to stay upright, as if maintaining his physical balance could somehow restore his moral standing. You've been collecting money from our dead children. I gasped, the air thin, unbreathable, choked by the enormity of his depravity. Pregnancy loss insurance through your work. I didn't even know that existed. $8,000 per miscarriage. $32,000. I calculated aloud, the sum a horrifying testament to his calculated cruelty. I kept scrolling, finding worse, unspeakably worse, with every swipe. You texted her from the hospital. I read, my voice broken rust. While I was miscarrying indigo, while I was literally losing our child, you wrote, one more after this and we're free. You held my hand through contractions, Jasper, pretending to be a loving husband, while you were meticulously planning the next murder. I never meant for it to hurt you like Jasper began. A pathetic, desperate attempt to justify the unjustifiable. You didn't mean to hurt me, I shrieked, the sound tearing from my gut, a primal scream of anguish and rage. The pregnancy tests, I snapped, the scattered pieces of my shattered reality suddenly clicking into place with a sickening thud. You always brought them home, didn't you? Always insisted on watching me take them. You knew exactly when I was pregnant so you could start poisoning me. You controlled the timeline of when each baby would die so it would never look suspicious. So no one would ever question your perfect, grieving husband. With a surge of fury, I hurled his phone at him, the impact a paltry release compared to the volcanic eruption inside me. You let me believe I was broken. You let your mother suggest you deserved a real woman who could give you children. You even agreed with her, then had the audacity to say you'd love me anyway, like you were doing me a favor. Beside me, Dean had already pulled out his phone, his face grim, his resolve clear. I'm calling the police, he stated, his voice steady, a beacon in the storm. Jasper reached for me, a desperate, fumbling gesture. Please, let me explain. Explain what? I countered, backing away from his poison touch, revulsion churning in my stomach. How you murdered our babies for money. How you poisoned me to afford your girlfriend, slowly. I kept retreating, creating distance, physical and emotional, from the monster I had loved for 7 years. I drained our savings for fertility treatments, for hope, while you were systematically collecting death benefits, profiting from our grief. Every night, I had prayed for a baby. Every morning, I had given myself painful injections that made me gain 30 pounds, bloating my body with hope and hormones. And your response, I whispered, my voice laced with bitter remembrance. You said I was less attractive, remember? While all along, you were poisoning me, actively destroying our family, to be with Sloan. Jasper's mouth moved, opening and closing like a fish out of water. But no words came out, no lies. No excuses, as if even he couldn't conjure a deception grand enough to cover this monstrous betrayal. Zane, meanwhile, was calmly relaying our address to the police, his voice a low hum against the escalating tension. Phoenix would have been to now, I said quietly, a haunting elegy for a life stolen. Sage would be walking. Indigo would be 3 months old, a tiny, precious soul. But to you, they were just transactions. $8,000 each. Sirens wailed in the distance, a mournful, approaching crescendo. Jasper stood there, utterly unable to speak, his world collapsing around him. I wanted to be a mother, I whispered, the plea of broken prayer. And you knew that. You watched me destroy myself trying. The sirens grew louder, closer, their insistent will filling the air. They're coming for you, I said, my voice cold and hard, stripped of all emotion. And I hope Sloan was worth it. Jasper's eyes darted frantically, wild with panic, and before I could even fully register his intent, he turned and bolted, making a desperate run for the back door. Zane just watched him go, then relayed the details of his escape to the emergency dispatcher. He held me so tightly while I crumbled, the raw, guttural sobs tearing from my throat. It felt like an eternity, a lifetime of suppressed grief finally erupting, when suddenly the front door exploded inward, shattering the fragile peace. 3 officers, silhouettes against the dimming light, stormed in, hands already instinctively on their weapons, their faces firm and alert. The sudden, jarring intrusion made Zane's comforting embrace loosen, his arms falling away from me in surprise. My own hand shot out, trembling uncontrollably, pointing instinctively toward the back door, which was still swinging erratically on its hinges. A silent testament to Jasper's panicked escape just moments before. Without a word, 2 of the officers sprinted like shadows through the kitchen, vanishing into the twilight of the backyard, while the third, a stern but watchful presence, remained with us. My entire body was convulsing with such violent tremors, I could barely maintain my footing, feeling utterly disconnected from my own limbs. The officers' questions, clear and precise, seemed to echo from a distant place. Ma'am, what happened here? Are you hurt? But the words, trapped somewhere in the knot of terror and disbelief in my throat, simply wouldn't come out. I could only manage to keep pointing, a desperate, silent plea, at the orange prescription bottle gleaming ominously on the kitchen counter, my sobs the only answer I could offer. With a profound sense of purpose, Zane stooped, retrieving Jasper's phone from where it had skittered across the floor, and handed it to the officer. The screen, a window into a horrifying reality, was still starkly displaying those vile, chilling texts about making dead babies pay for their future. I watched, a silent observer in my own nightmare, as the officer's expression shifted, morphing from polite confusion into one of profound, stomach-lurching horror as he scrolled through the insidious messages. The air thickened with unspoken dread. Almost immediately, he pulled out his radio, his voice firm and urgent, calling for evidence bags and a full crime scene team, the official term sounding surreal in our once peaceful home. Outside, the mournful wail of approaching sirens grew steadily louder, a chorus of urgency converging on our street. Within moments, paramedics, their faces etched with professional concern, were ushering through the doorway, their substantial equipment bags flung over their shoulders. One look at my violently shaking frame and hair-streaked face was all it took. They moved with practiced efficiency, instantly starting to check my vitals. The numbers they rattled off were alarming. My blood pressure dangerously high at 180/110, and my pulse racing frantically at 140 beats per minute, a frantic drumbeat against the chaos. "She needs to go to the emergency room immediately," the paramedic stated, her voice brooking no argument. She then explained, with a solemn gravity that chilled me to the bone, that being repeatedly poisoned for nearly 2 years an agonizing, invisible campaign of malice could have inflicted devastating, potentially irreparable, internal damage. Damage we, of course, couldn't see, but the severity of which was clearly understood. "I'll drive you," Zane said, his voice a steady anchor in my swirling disorientation, as he gently helped me to my feet. My legs felt like unstable jelly, utterly useless, and I had to lean heavily on his solid frame to manage even a few halting steps. The officer, observing our struggle, informed us that detectives would rendezvous with us at the hospital to take my formal statement. Stepping outside felt like entering a different dimension. For police cars now idled at the curb, their lights a silent, rhythmic strobe against the deepening twilight, painting the street in hues of red and blue. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion like moths to a flame, stood hushed on their porches, their eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and shock. I caught sight of Mrs. Henderson from next door, her hand pressed firmly over her mouth, a silent gasp of disbelief. Zane carefully settled me into his car, and we drove to the hospital in a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the ragged patch of my breath and my own occasional, involuntary sobs. At the emergency room, the moment Zane, with a clipped, urgent tone, uttered the word poisoning, they bypassed all waiting and ushered me directly back. The triage nurse's eyes, I remember distinctly, widened with a startling intensity when she grasped the severity of the situation's calculated, ongoing poisoning and its devastating physical toll. I was placed in a private room, and a doctor, her demeanor radiating calm competence, appeared within minutes. To her, I recounted the entire harrowing ordeal, the 4 crushing miscarriages that had stripped me of hope and joy, the gut-wrenching discovery that Jasper, the man I loved, had been systematically administering abortion medication to me. She listened with an unwavering gaze, then methodically ordered a battery of tests, comprehensive blood work, urine tests, detailed liver function tests to assess the potential internal ravages, and an ultrasound to meticulously search for any organ damage. A nurse, quiet and efficient, entered next, drawing what felt like an astonishing 20 vials of blood, each prick a tiny reminder of the violation. Then another nurse, armed with a camera, meticulously photographed me for evidence, her lens capturing not just my tear-stained face, but also my arms, crisscrossed with the ghostly remnants of remarks from those torturous miscarriages, and my swollen belly, a poignant, cruel irony from the fertility drugs I'd taken with such desperate hope. "Everything will be thoroughly documented for the police report," she explained, her voice professional, but not unkind. Through the thin walls of the room, I could faintly discern Zane's voice from the waiting room, murmuring into his phone. He later told me he was calling in sick to work, the demands of the ordinary world seeming ludicrously distant, and texting our friend group, the devastating news rippling outward. A profound guilt seemed to cling to him. He kept repeating, almost obsessively, how he should have said something when he'd seen Jasper with Sloane. An unsettling detail that hinted at another layer of betrayal. He looked utterly destroyed by the self-reproach, his face drawn and hollow, whenever he slipped into the room to check on me between tests. After what felt like an agonizing 2 hours, the lead investigator arrived. Detective Lionel Mallister, a tall man with surprisingly kind eyes that belied the seriousness of his profession, introduced himself. He carried a laptop, its screen glowing faintly, and began typing with practiced efficiency as I, from the surreal confines of the hospital bed, painstakingly recounted everything from the very beginning. I detailed our nearly 2-year journey of trying for a baby, a path paved with hope and then dashed by those 4 devastating miscarriages that had, quite literally, destroyed a part of me. I spoke of the costly fertility treatments that had devoured our entire life savings, of the shocking discovery of the prescription bottle just hours ago, of those chilling texts about insurance money and Jasper's panicked flight as the sirens drew near. Detective Mallister listened intently, interjecting with detailed questions about specific dates, times, and medical records, ensuring every piece of the puzzle was meticulously placed. He handed me his business card, his direct cell phone number clearly printed, a tangible link to the ongoing investigation. He then explained the need for my formal consent to conduct a thorough search of our house. Without hesitation, I signed the form, eager for justice. They would be collecting everything from the kitchen and all medications from the house, he clarified, his voice calm and reassuring. He then revealed that they had already put out an alert for Jasper's car and had frozen his credit cards and bank accounts. Jasper won't get far, he stated, a quiet promise of swift apprehension. Once the detective had left, a social worker entered my room. She was an older woman, her hands gentle and comforting, who sat beside me and quietly, empathetically, explained that what I had endured, this insidious manipulation of my reproductive choices, was a recognized and egregious form of domestic abuse turned reproductive coercion. She provided me with vital pamphlets detailing emergency protective orders and victim resources, her words validating the unspeakable horror I had experienced. What Jasper did, she emphasized, her voice firm with conviction, was nothing short of attempted murder, fraud, and domestic violence, all rolled into one horrific act, right there. On the hospital bed, she patiently helped me complete the paperwork for an emergency restraining order, an immediate shield against his malevolence. The doctor returned around 9 o'clock that night, her face a mixture of concern and professional resolve, bearing my test results. How could someone plan something so utterly vile, so calculated and cruel? It was almost beyond comprehension. Jasper had actually been timing the administration of the abortion medication, meticulously aligning it with my positive pregnancy tests, ensuring maximum destruction. My liver enzymes, she confirmed, were significantly elevated, a direct consequence of the repeated poisoning. It would take months, she cautioned, to fully understand the extent of the damage. She prescribed medications to aid my liver's healing process and provided referrals to specialists, guiding me toward a path of recovery. You were incredibly lucky, she said, her voice weighted with the gravity of the truth, that Zane found that bottle when he did. Another pregnancy, with Jasper continuing to poison you, could have very well killed you. The word hung in the air, a stark, terrifying revelation of how close I'd come to the brink. I was finally discharged around 10:30 p.m., clutching a daunting stack of papers, instructions, prescriptions, and follow-up appointments that felt like a roadmap to an uncertain future. Zane drove me directly to his apartment. Our own house, the police had declared, was officially a crime scene. I couldn't return for at least 48 hours while they meticulously processed every piece of evidence. Zane's apartment was small, a cozy, masculine space, but immaculately clean. He thoughtfully set me up in his guest room, the bed adorned with crisp, fresh sheets and soft towels. He then made soothing chamomile tea and sat silently with me as I stared blankly at the wall, my mind a jumble of fragmented thoughts, everything feeling utterly surreal. As if this horrifying narrative was unfolding not for me, but for some distant, unfortunate stranger. My phone, a relentless harbinger of the outside world, kept buzzing with calls and texts from people who had heard the unthinkable news. But I simply wouldn't deal with any of it. At the stroke of midnight, I finally gathered the strength to call my boss. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but I knew, with an agonizing certainty, that I couldn't possibly go to work tomorrow, or probably for weeks to come. She could hear it in my voice, the raw, trembling edge of unspeakable trauma, an unspoken understanding that something truly terrible had occurred. I simply said it was a family emergency and that I desperately needed time off, a meager explanation for a cataclysmic shift in my world. Her voice, though sympathetic, delivered a jarring sense of finality, informing me to take all the time I needed, whatever time you need, she'd explicitly stated, and that each R would handle the necessary arrangements. Sending forth the cascade of paperwork required for what she termed family medical leave, was this supposed to be comforting? A grim irony, perhaps, given the circumstances that necessitated such a leave. The click of the phone disconnecting echoed in the suffocating silence, leaving me suspended in a void. I remained utterly motionless, a mere shell of myself, perched precariously on Zane's plush couch, my gaze fixed on an indiscernible point in the distance, a nothing that perfectly mirrored the emptiness swirling within me. The hours bled into one another, each minute a leaden weight, until the insidious tendrils of exhaustion finally claimed me, pulling me into a fitful, haunted slumber sometime around 3 o'clock in the morning. Was sleep truly a refuge, or merely a temporary cessation of the unbearable? A few agonizing hours later, I jolted awake, a sliver of desperate hope flickering through the murky haze of consciousness. My immediate, visceral reaction was a fervent, almost childish prayer that perhaps, just perhaps, the preceding horrors had been nothing more than a particularly cruel and convoluted nightmare, a twisted figment of my tormented imagination. How I yearned for that to be true, to peel back the layers of reality and find only the comforting familiarity of my old life. Yet, as my eyes fluttered open, clarity brutal and undeniable slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. There, stacked white against the pallor of my skin, was the hospital bracelet, a chilling memento still stubbornly clinging to my wrist, a silent, damning testament to the invasive tests they'd subjected me to. It was a tangible, undeniable tether to the nightmare dragging me back into its icy grip. The unvarnished truth, raw and unforgiving, crashed over me with renewed ferocity, a wave of nauseating despair. It was as if I'd been struck by an unseen assailant, leaving me gasping for air, clutching at my stomach. I barely managed to stumble, a frantic, desperate scramble, towards Dane's bathroom, my body convulsing even before I reached the porcelain sanctuary. Succumbing to an uncontrollable torrent of sickness, the cold, unforgiving tiles of the bathroom floor offered a harsh, unflinching embrace as I collapsed, a heap of misery. For what felt like an eternity, almost an hour by the cruel measure of time, I remained there, racked by violent, agonizing dry heaves, each convulsion tearing at my very core, punctuated by guttural sobs that scraped raw my throat. I wept until the wellspring of my tears had run utterly dry, until there was absolutely nothing left within me to expel, neither sorrow nor bile. Was this the true definition of rock bottom, or was there still further to fall? A soft, tentative knock at the door, barely audible, announced Dane's presence, a gentle interruption to my private torment. He entered, a silent, solicitous presence, offering a glass of cool water and a damp, comforting washcloth, tangible symbols of his unwavering care. Yet, I couldn't even bring myself to meet his eyes, to acknowledge his loving concern. A burning, mortifying shame consumed me. The humiliation of being seen in such an utterly broken, fallen-apart state was simply too profound, too raw to bear. How could I face him when I felt so utterly stripped bare? Around 9 o'clock, the insistent, shrill summons of my phone shattered the fragile quiet, a jarring intrusion. My heart, still tender and bruised, lurched with trepidation when I saw the caller ID a blocked number, an anonymous void that screamed of potential trouble. My instinct was to let it ring, to retreat further into the cocoon of my despair, yet an unshakable, almost perverse curiosity, as something I couldn't quite articulate, compelled my trembling hand to answer the call, to step unwittingly into the next phase of this unfolding nightmare. The detective's voice, remarkably calm and steadfastly professional, was a stark contrast to the maelstrom raging within me. He delivered the damning news with a chilling precision. We've located the prescription bottle at your residence, he stated matter-of-factly before dropping the next bombshell. Their meticulous investigation had unearthed a labyrinthine trail of deceit, uncovering irrefutable records that revealed Jasper had been systematically obtaining refills for the same medication from no less than 3 distinct pharmacies, each time using the fraudulent guise of different doctors. It was a meticulously orchestrated fraud, a cruel testament to his calculated malevolence. As if that weren't enough, he further informed me that the insurance company, a giant awakened by the scent of fiscal impropriety, had already launched its own rigorous investigation into the depths of this insidious fraud. Their involvement, he gravely predicted, meant that they would, in all likelihood, be wanting to talk to me soon, drawing me deeper into the bureaucratic and legal quagmire, transforming me from victim to witness, perhaps even an unwitting participant in their relentless pursuit of justice. After the detective's call, a fresh wave of sickening realization washed over me. Amidst the chaos and the burgeoning horror, a small, once hopeful detail resurfaced, my fertility appointment, meticulously scheduled for that very afternoon. A relic from a life now shattered beyond recognition. The bitter irony twisted in my gut. How could I possibly attend? With a heavy heart, I dialed the clinic, the active cancellation of brutal severance from a future I'd so desperately envisioned. As I began to haltingly explain the grim, unspeakable reasons why I simply couldn't come in the sheer impossibility of it, the nurse on the other end of the line became unsettlingly quiet. The brief, almost imperceptible pause spoke volumes, her silence heavy with unspoken implications, before she stiffly announced, "I need to transfer you to someone else," a phrase that instantly sent a fresh jolt of fear through me. What could possibly be so sensitive that it required a departmental transfer? The next voice to greet me was distinctly different, imbued with an official, almost clinical tone. She identified herself as being from their legal department, a chilling confirmation of my mounting dread, and without preamble, declared that they were flagging my file immediately. The innocuous-sounding term flagging carried a sinister weight, signifying an alarm. A red alert now irrevocably attached to my medical history. With an unnerving directness, she confirmed that they would be providing all my medical records, every intimate detail of my past hopes and heartbreaks to support the burgeoning criminal case, effectively transforming my most personal vulnerabilities into public evidence. Then came the chilling question, delivered with an almost clinical detachment, "Do you have a lawyer yet?" The implication was clear. I was no longer just a patient. I was now inextricably entangled in a legal battle. A pawn in a larger, darker game. A lawyer. The very notion had simply not registered in my shattered mind, a testament to the sheer, overwhelming deluge of horrors that had consumed me. It was a stark reminder of how far removed I was from the grim realities of this situation, how ill-equipped I was to navigate this terrifying new terrain. As the clock crept towards noon, my phone, an unwelcome harbinger of further calamity, rang once more. This time, the caller ID presented a new, unfamiliar name, Alicia Mead, representing my employer's insurance department. Just when I thought the layers of complexity couldn't possibly deepen, another entity, another professional voice, was drawn into the ever-widening circle of this tragedy. Her voice, meticulously modulated and professional, couldn't quite mask the palpable undercurrent of shock and disbelief that threaded through her carefully chosen words. She explained her purpose, to request a recorded statement from me. A formal account regarding the pregnancy loss claims that had been filed, a clinical term that starkly failed to capture the profound, gut-wrenching grief each claim represented. This wasn't merely about finances. It was about the brutal monetization of my deepest sorrows. For a grueling 40 minutes, I was forced to revisit, in excruciating detail, each agonizing miscarriage, painstakingly recounting the precise dates of their occurrence and, in a particularly brutal twist, the exact monetary figures that had been paid out for each. As I recounted these intimate, heartbreaking details, Alicia, with the cold efficiency of a stenographer, typed everything up, transforming my profound personal losses into mere data points. Financial transactions on a ledger of despair. Each word I spoke felt like a fresh wound, each number a stab to the heart. Despite her strenuous efforts to maintain a veneer of professionalism, the sheer enormity of what I was describing occasionally pierced through, manifesting in interjections like, I'm so incredibly sorry. Aura hushed, incredulous. This is utterly unbelievable. Her human reaction, though perhaps unintentional, offered a fleeting, fragile connection in the otherwise sterile interrogation. A brief acknowledgement that even in the world of insurance claims, some horrors simply defy dispassionate processing. As soon as that soul-crushing call concluded, an urgent, almost primal need for tangible proof consumed me. I clawed my way to my laptop, my fingers fumbling with the keyboard, driven by an desperate impulse to verify. To see the proof for myself, to confront the irrefutable evidence of Jasper's monstrous deception. I plunged into the cold, hard data of our joint bank statements, my heart pounding with a sickening anticipation. And there they were, starkly undeniable, emblazoned on the digital screen. The illicit deposits, plain as day, concrete proof that glared back at me with sickening clarity. Like grotesque markers of my sorrow, they stood out, impossible to ignore, mocking my past innocence. $8,000. That specific, sickening sum, meticulously credited to our joint account after each agonizing miscarriage. A brutal transaction directly tied to my suffering. And then, with a speed that spoke volumes about his premeditated calculation, each deposit was immediately siphoned off, transferred with ruthless efficiency to a separate, private account. One that bore only Jasper's name, a clear, undeniable trail of financial exploitation, etched in the digital ledger. The correlation was horrifyingly precise, a cold, clinical affirmation of his depravity. The dates of these insidious deposits aligned perfectly, chillingly so, with the very days I had suffered the devastating loss of each precious baby. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a meticulously planned, monstrously executed scheme. With a grim resolve born of utter shock, I methodically captured screenshots of every damning detail, each click of the mess a silent vow of retribution. These digital evidentiary footprints, the irrefutable proof, were then immediately dispatched, first to my own secure email for safekeeping, and then, without hesitation, to the detective, sealing Jasper's fate with his own financial machinations. No sooner had I concluded this grim task than my phone, a ceaseless tormentor, blared once more. This time, the caller ID revealed a name that sent a fresh jolt of nausea through me, Jasper's mother. My initial, powerful inclination was to ignore it, to silence the impending storm, but a morbid, almost masochistic curiosity, a need to confront the architect of this familial delusion, spurred me to answer. What new distortion of reality would she present? Before I could even utter a tentative hello, her voice, shrill and venomous, erupted through the receiver, a torrent of unadulterated rage. She launched into a full-throated tirade, screaming accusations that I was ruining her son's life with my lies and hysteria, a chilling echo of Jasper's own twisted narratives. How dare I involve the police, she shrieked, in what she outrageously termed a private family matter, as if premeditated murder and fraud could ever be confined to the realm of domestic squabbles. Her words were a frantic attempt to control the narrative, to deflect blame, a masterclass in gaslighting. Then came the cruelest cut, a personal attack designed to wound and diminish. You've always been unstable, she venomously asserted, twisting my very nature. And this just proves it. Her final, damning declaration, Jasper is better off without you. A twisted blessing that felt more like a curse, designed to isolate and invalidate every shred of my being. Her words were a final, brutal rejection, not just of me, but of the truth itself. With a surge of cold fury, I abruptly ended the call, severing the toxic connection. But not before a flicker of foresight, a new, steely resolve had kicked in. I had instinctively, almost reflexively, activated the recording function on Zane's phone, capturing her entire, venomous diatribe. This wasn't just self-preservation. It was about gathering evidence, ensuring her vile accusations, her complicity in this web of lies, would not be lost to the winds of denial. Without a moment's hesitation, I forwarded that damning recording directly to the detective, adding another crucial piece to the intricate puzzle of Jasper's crimes. Then, with a decisive sweep, I systematically blocked her number, her husband's number, and Jasper's sister's number too, a preemptive strike born of bitter certainty. I knew, with a chilling clarity, that the orchestrated familial assault, the relentless barrage of calls from his flying monkeys, would inevitably follow, and I was determined to shut them down. To reclaim a semblance of peace from their toxic influence. The next 3 days dissolved into an exhausting, disorienting blur, a ceaseless whirlwind of formal police interviews where I recounted the same harrowing details again and again, interspersed with a relentless barrage of phone calls from astute lawyers and probing insurance investigators. I was no longer merely a victim. I was now a key figure in a burgeoning criminal investigation, my life utterly consumed by legal proceedings and the relentless pursuit of justice. Then, amidst the deluge of official communications, an unexpected email materialized in my inbox. Its sender's address an unfamiliar string of characters that immediately piqued my suspicion. It was an anonymous digital missive, a digital ghost in the machine, yet its very anonymity screamed of something insidious. The moment I clicked it open, a cold wave of recognition washed over me. There was no doubt, no lingering question. The words, the insidious tone, the underlying manipulation, I knew right away with a gut-wrenching certainty that it was from Jasper, a desperate, pathetic plea from the man who had systematically destroyed my world. His message, a masterclass in gaslighting and denial, audacious in its very existence, claimed that this entire unfolding nightmare was nothing more than a huge misunderstanding. With a desperate, almost groveling tone, he begged me to call off the police, to halt the inexorable machinery of justice before things went too far, as if the consequences of his deliberate, calculated actions were somehow reversible, as if I could simply erase the devastating impact of his monstrous deception. But the sheer audacity, the unparalleled gall, truly manifested in his next assertion. He actually had the nerve to audaciously claim that the medication, the very substance he'd systematically administered to me, was purportedly intended to help manage my miscarriages, to somehow alleviate my suffering, rather than, in the horrifying truth, to deliberately cause them. It was a vile inversion of reality, a twisted attempt to reframe his malicious actions as acts of twisted benevolence, essentially blaming me for the very outcome he engineered. Did he truly believe I was stupid enough to swallow such a transparent, monstrous lie? The indignation flared within me, a sharp contrast to the cold sickness that had settled in my stomach. It was an insult to my intelligence, an affront to every ounce of my suffering, a final, pathetic attempt to manipulate me. His warped justification continued its descent into depravity. He claimed he had been trying to spare me more pain, a grotesque mockery of genuine compassion. By ending the pregnancies early when he, in his self-appointed medical expertise, could tell they weren't viable, he portrayed himself as a benevolent, albeit misguided, protector, rather than the calculated perpetrator he truly was. It was a chilling testament to his profound lack of empathy, his ability to twist even the most heinous acts into a self-serving narrative of care. The sheer volume of his lies, the nauseating audacity of his self-justifications, assaulted me with such intensity that my body rebelled once more. The physical sickness, a visceral manifestation of the emotional trauma, returned with a vengeance, compelling me to run to the bathroom again, to once more purge the overwhelming disgust that threatened to consume me. The ordeal, it seemed, was far from over, its echoes continuing to haunt my very physiology. The very next day, a proactive step amidst the ongoing wreckage saw me heading to an appointment with a highly regarded reproductive specialist, a recommendation made by the detective himself. The purpose was grim yet crucial, to undergo a thorough assessment of the extensive damage Jasper's insidious actions had wrought upon my body, to medically quantify the brutal cost of his treachery. It was a stark shift from hoping for life to assessing the ruin. With a somber yet methodical approach, the doctor meticulously reviewed my entire medical history, delving into the intimate details of my reproductive journey. Her explanation was chillingly precise. The repeated exposure to the harmful substance, mifepristone, he forced upon me, could have, she greatly confirmed, inflicted serious damage to the most delicate and vital organs of my reproductive system, my uterus and cervix. She detailed the insidious ways the poison would have attacked, compromised, and weakened these crucial structures, painting a vivid, horrifying picture of internal devastation. To ascertain the full extent of this internal devastation, she immediately ordered a battery of specialized tests and comprehensive blood work, a testament to the complexity and severity of the suspected damage. Her voice softened, tinged with a compassionate gravity, as she delivered the devastating prognosis: my future fertility might be permanently affected, the very essence of my womanhood. My most profound dreams of motherhood now hung precariously in the balance, potentially irrevocably compromised by one man's malice. Was this yet another life Jasper had stolen from me? In a stark admission of the rarity and sheer depravity of my situation, she confessed that while she had, regrettably, seen cases like this before, instances of severe reproductive trauma, she had never encountered one where the cause was deliberate poisoning by a spouse. Her words underscored the horrific, almost unprecedented nature of Jasper's crime, elevating it beyond mere medical negligence to an act of profound, calculated spousal abuse, an intimate betrayal of the highest order. At the very same time I was confronting the physical ramifications of Jasper's cruelty in the sterile confines of the doctor's office, Zane, a steadfast pillar of support, was simultaneously at the police station. He was courageously providing his formal statement, meticulously detailing the incriminating occasions when he had personally witnessed Jasper in the company of Sloane, Jasper's alleged mistress. The threads of deception, it seemed, were being meticulously woven together by multiple hands. Crucially, Zane armed the detective with irrefutable photographic evidence, images captured on his phone from a specific incident last month, documenting his sighting of Jasper and Sloane together at a restaurant. This was at the very time Jasper had, with a casual lie, assured me he was engaged in a client dinner. The photographs, digital silent witnesses, directly contradicted Jasper's carefully constructed alibi, exposing his infidelity and duplicity. One particular photograph, a damning piece of visual evidence, spoke volumes. It distinctly showed Sloane's hand resting intimately on Jasper's neck, a gesture of undeniable affection and familiarity that transcended mere professional courtesy. Their proximity in the image, the undeniable closeness, screamed of an intimacy that went way too close to just be co-workers, leaving no room for doubt about the nature of their clandestine relationship. It was a tangible crack in the facade of Jasper's perfect life. Furthermore, Zane recounted to the police his direct confrontation with Jasper about the sighting, and how Jasper, with characteristic arrogance and deceit, had brazenly lied. Dismissing it all as just a work project, this intentional falsehood, a blatant attempt to cover his tracks and manipulate Zane, further solidified the pattern of Jasper's deception, painting a picture of a man utterly devoid of honesty and integrity. Later that same afternoon, the detective called me again, his voice carrying an undeniable gravity. He delivered an update that, incredibly, managed to make everything even worse, piling fresh layers of horror onto an already unbearable situation. Just when I thought the depths of Jasper's depravity had been fully plumbed, another, even more chilling revelation was about to surface. His words sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. The forensics team, he stated, had rigorously tested our coffee maker, an innocent, everyday appliance in our home. now transformed into an instrument of terror. The results were damning. They had detected my firstone residue, the very poison Jasper had so cruelly used not only in the water reservoir but also alarmingly within the filter itself. The revelation of his insidious method, how he had integrated his vile plot into the fabric of our daily routine, was utterly sickening. But the grim discoveries didn't end there. They had also meticulously examined the vitamin supplements Jasper had so solicitously been giving me, ostensibly for stress accrual facade of care designed to cloak his malevolence. The tests revealed a chilling manipulation. The pills meant for my well-being had been opened and resealed with the sentence hung in the air and finished. Yet the implication was horrifically clear. Another layer of his methodical, meticulous poisoning had been unveiled, a testament to his chillingly comprehensive plan to destroy me from within. The medication, a sinister concoction, had been expertly mixed into my drinks. The detective, his expression grim, articulated the chilling implication. This wasn't merely a series of isolated, tragic events, but rather a meticulously orchestrated campaign of deliberate poisoning, meticulously executed over an agonizingly extended period. It painted a picture of cold, calculating malice, not unfortunate happenstance. 3 days later, the world still felt like a blurry, unsettling dream. I found myself in a therapist's waiting room, an incongruous blend of sensory experiences, the cloying sweetness of vanilla candles vying with the stale, dusty scent of old magazines. My hands, trembling uncontrollably, were wrapped so tightly around a flimsy paper cup of water that the ripples mirrored the tumultuous waves crashing inside me. What was happening to my life? How had it come to this? Suddenly, the therapist's door creaked open, breaking the silence, and a woman emerged, her gray hair neatly pulled back in a sensible bun. Her voice, calm and clear, pronounced my name. Elise Meredith's office, a sanctuary of sorts, was a verdant oasis, brimming with lush plants and offering an array of soft, inviting chairs that, upon sitting, enveloped you, making you feel as though you were sinking into their comforting depths. She listened with an unwavering gaze as I poured out the entire horrifying saga, starting from the innocuous prescription bottle that had first raised my suspicions and culminating with the seemingly innocent coffee maker, now forever tainted in my memory. When my voice finally trailed off, exhausted and raw, she leaned forward, her eyes filled with an understanding that transcended mere sympathy. And then, she uttered the words I hadn't realized I was so desperately craving to hear, words that shifted the very foundation of my reality. She called it attempted murder. Not just betrayal. It wasn't just a shattered heart. It was a premeditated crime. We spent the remaining moments of that hour meticulously crafting a safety plan, a tangible shield against the lingering shadows of fear. It encompassed practical, concrete steps, changing all the locks, procuring a brand new and traceable phone number. It was only when she carefully wrote down the crisis hotline number, a beacon of hope in the darkness, and extracted a solemn promise from me to call if ever I felt unsafe again, that the incessant tremor in my hands finally subsided, replaced by a fragile sense of calm. The very next morning, the detective's call shattered the fragile peace. He requested my presence at the station, his tone urgent. They had managed to retrieve our home security footage, not from some obscure local drive, but from the seemingly ephemeral cloud backup, a digital repository I had completely forgotten we even possessed. It was a stark reminder of how our lives are continuously captured, unknowingly, by unseen eyes. The timestamps on the footage painted a horrifyingly precise picture. Jasper, my husband, returning home, pharmacy bags clutched in his hand, on January 15th, then again on March 3rd, May 20th, and finally, July 8th. The chilling, undeniable pattern emerged. Each of those dates was exactly 2 days before I suffered the unspeakable loss of a baby. Was this truly just a coincidence, or something far more sinister? The worst, most gut-wrenching part, however, was yet to come. It was the moment they played the kitchen camera footage, a silent, damning testament to his depravity. There he was, my husband, calmly, methodically adding a fine white powder to my morning smoothie while I still lay unsuspecting in bed, blissfully unaware of the poison brewing. He would stir it with an almost unsettling meticulousness, then wash the spoon with the same careful precision, as if performing a mundane household chore. And then, with a twisted display of affection, he would bring it to me, often accompanied by a tender kiss on my forehead, an act of ultimate betrayal, cloaked in tenderness. The detective, witnessing my visceral reaction to this horrifying tableau, had to mercifully pause the video when I began violently throwing up into their trash can. The bitter taste of truth overwhelming me. They offered ginger ale and crackers, a small gesture of comfort amidst the unfolding nightmare, while explaining that they'd unearthed even more incriminating evidence from Jasper's digital devices. He, it turned out, had been using a labyrinth of encrypted messaging apps to communicate with Sloan, his accomplice, desperately attempting to purge every trace of their vile conspiracy after my confrontation. Their tech team, a dedicated cadre of digital forensic specialists, was working tirelessly on recovery, a painstaking process they warned could stretch into weeks before every last detail was unearthed. The detective, a meticulous chronicler of human depravity, steadily filled his notebook with every single detail, every timestamp, every recovered fragment of text, while I sat there, feeling as though my entire life, my most intimate moments, had been reduced to mere evidence, scrutinized and dissected. That very same week, driven by an unbearable need for escape, I began my frantic search for a new apartment. Sleeping in that house, a place once filled with love and laughter, now felt like an unbearable torture. Every apartment showing was an exercise in dissociation, a surreal experience where I felt like a detached observer, watching someone else wander through unfamiliar, empty rooms and ask about mundane lease terms. The first place, a sleek, modern unit, was simply too expensive. Its cost a stark reminder of my shattered financial future. The second, a modest dwelling, unfortunately faced a playground. Its incessant symphony of children's screams and laughter, though innocent, a painful echo of what had been stolen from me. The third, a devastating blow, featured a kitchen that was an almost identical replica of my own, forcing me to flee abruptly before the agent could even finish her cheerful monologue about the dishwasher's features. Finally, after what felt like an endless quest, I discovered a small, one-bedroom sanctuary nestled above a bakery. Every morning, the comforting aroma of freshly baked goods would waft up, a smell I inexplicably associated with the color red, perhaps the warmth, the passion, the life I was desperately trying to reclaim. The landlord, kind and understanding soul, mercifully asked no probing questions when I, in my hurried escape, couldn't provide a reference from my current, now tainted, address. 2 weeks later, the district attorney's office made contact. Vincent Milligan, the man on the other end, possessed a voice like gravel, and a nervous habit of clearing his throat as he explained the gravity of the situation. They were meticulously building not one, but two separate cases. One, an open-ended case of egregious poisoning, and the other, a chillingly calculated scheme of insurance fraud. He assured me, with a note of grim determination, that the evidence was overwhelmingly strong, a solid foundation for justice. However, he also issued a stark warning. The arduous legal process would undoubtedly stretch on for months, perhaps even longer, demanding an unimaginable toll. They would, he explained, require me to testify, to relive every excruciating detail, every moment of terror and betrayal in front of a cold, impartial panel of strangers who would sit in judgment, deciding if my pain, my suffering, was authentic enough to warrant true justice. He provided me with the number for a victim advocate, a lifeline of support, urging me to call if I needed anything at all. But in that moment, in the quiet understanding between us, we both knew with a crushing certainty that what I truly needed, what had been irrevocably stolen, was simply impossible to get back. The divorce papers arrived with a brutal swiftness the very next day, a cruel punctuation mark to the unfolding tragedy. Jasper's lawyer, a faithless entity, audaciously claimed I was in the throes of a mental breakdown, spewing baseless, false accusations. The audacity of his argument ignited a fierce, righteous anger within me. What kind of person, consumed by such malevolence, would be so meticulously careless as to document their own heinous crimes? The unblinking security footage, a silent, damning witness, showed Jasper, my husband, calmly mixing that insidious white powder into my morning smoothies while I lay vulnerable and unconscious in our bed. Had he simply forgotten the omnipresent gaze of our cameras, or, in his chilling arrogance, genuinely believed he would never be held accountable? Their legal team, a calculated offensive, sought immediate control of our shared assets, asserting with a dismissive cruelty that I was far too unstable, too emotionally fractured, to make any sound financial decisions. My hands, trembling not from fear now, but from a searing, incandescent rage, clutched the papers as I devoured his claims that I was delusional, that the entire horrific ordeal was nothing more than a figment of my grief-stricken imagination. He even went so far as to suggest I required a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation before any divorce proceedings could possibly move forward, a blatant attempt to discredit and silence me. The papers felt impossibly heavy in my hands, their weight a tangible manifestation of his continued, relentless efforts to destroy me, even from the confines of his jail cell. That very afternoon, after a frustrating marathon of calls to 6 other lawyers who all, with varying degrees of regret, deemed my case too complicated, I finally hired Cyrus McQueen. He was an investment, to say the least, his fees exceeding what I earned in 3 painstaking months. Yet, his unwavering gaze and resolute promise to fiercely combat every single fabrication Jasper was meticulously spreading felt like a lifeline. His first, decisive move was to immediately file for a protective order, a crucial barrier against further harassment, and to freeze our joint accounts, preemptively halting any attempt Jasper might make to empty them. He then had me meticulously recount every single detail I could recall, every fragment of memory, while he diligently transcribed my words onto a yellow legal pad. The crisp paper a stark contrast to the chaos of my life. When I finally finished, exhausted but unburdened, he looked at me over the rim of his glasses, his voice calm and resolute, and declared, with an almost chilling certainty, "We are going to bury Jasper in court." The following week, the inevitable FMLA paperwork arrived from work, a stark reminder of the fragile balance between personal catastrophe and professional obligation. My manager called, her voice carefully modulated, almost hushed, as if afraid that any sudden sound might cause me to shudder. She offered condolences and assured me to take all the time I needed, but the unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. My performance review was looming, and the promotion I had, ironically, turned down to reduce stress now felt like yet another thing Jasper had cruelly stolen from me. I filled out the forms at my new kitchen table, the unfamiliar surface a symbol of my new, solitary life. In the reason box, I scrawled family medical emergency, a tragically inadequate phrase, because there simply wasn't a checkbox for husband murdered my babies. 3 weeks into finding a semblance of routine in my new apartment, fate, with its cruel sense of irony, orchestrated an unexpected encounter. I ran into Sloane, Jasper's mistress, at the grocery store. My heart lurched, then plummeted when I saw her casually browsing the aisles, pregnancy tests clutched in her hand. The bitter, gut-wrenching irony of the situation was almost unbearable, making me want to scream until my lungs gave out. But instead, a cold clarity descended, and I instinctively pulled out my phone, pressing record. She walked right up to me, with an astonishing audacity that made my blood run cold, reaching out to touch my arm. Her voice, unnervingly high and saccharine sweet, insisted she had absolutely no idea what Jasper was doing, attempting to feign innocence. She continued, maintaining her carefully constructed facade, insisting that while they were indeed together, she believed I was fully aware of their affair. She even had the gall to claim that Jasper had told her we had an arrangement, a clandestine understanding, and that our marriage was merely a charade, a public performance. She kept talking, her words flowing freely, utterly oblivious to the glowing red light of my phone recording her every confession. She admitted they'd been together for a staggering 8 months, and then, with a casual cruelty that stole my breath, revealed he had promised to leave me right after the holidays, when she finally, upon noticing my phone, her face visibly drained of all color, turning a ghastly white as she practically scrambled, almost fled, to her car, her movements stiff with shock. The weight of anticipation hung heavy in the air until the very next day when the blood test results finally arrived. The doctor's voice, though professional, carried a note of grave concern as she explained their findings. Traces of furisoni metabolites, the insidious chemical signature of the poison, were still detectable in my system. A chilling 5 weeks after the very last instance of poisoning. This wasn't merely a fleeting exposure, she emphasized. It unequivocally proved repeated exposure over a sustained period, indicating that my body had been systematically and deliberately saturated with a powerful, dangerous drug. This documentation, she stated, her voice taking on a more formal tone, will be absolutely crucial, indispensable even, for the criminal case that lies ahead. Then, almost as an afterthought, she inquired if I needed a referral for counseling. I nearly let out a bitter, ironic laugh right there. I was already seeing a therapist at least twice a week, relentlessly trying to untangle the knotted threads of my reality, and yet, it still felt woefully inadequate to make even an ounce of sense of the unimaginable horror that had unfolded. The subsequent 2 weeks blurred into an exhausting, disorienting haze of invasive police interviews, probing questions, and endless medical tests, each one a stark reminder of the violation I had endured, before the call finally came. The detective's voice, deliberately flat and devoid of emotion, delivered the news. They had pulled Jasper over for something as mundane as a broken taillight, a seemingly insignificant detail. But 3 states away, a desperate attempt to put distance between himself and his monstrous deeds. He had been living out of his car, a pathetic testament to his rapid descent, hadn't shaved in days, and, in a moment that offered a perverse glimpse into his unraveling psyche, he had started to sob uncontrollably the instant the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. The booking photo they later sent me was a chilling revelation. It depicted someone I barely recognized, a gaunt, broken reflection of the man I once knew. His eyes were disturbingly hollow, vacant wells of despair, and his clothes, a wrinkled, stained mess, spoke volumes of his squalid existence. I stared at that disturbing image for what felt like an eternity, perhaps an entire hour, desperately searching for any flicker of emotion within myself beyond the pervasive, suffocating emptiness that had taken root. Zane, ever the pillar of unwavering support, gently kept asking if I was okay, but the truth was, I couldn't answer, because I honestly didn't know. How could I possibly be okay? The bail hearing, a grim formality, transpired 3 days later in a courtroom that assaulted the senses with the stale, cloying scent of old coffee mingled with the sharp tang of floor cleaner. Jasper's mother, a picture of defiant denial, sat rigidly in the front row, resplendent in her Sunday best. Her eyes, however, were anything but reverent. They were twin daggers, launching, silent, venomous accusations directly at me. When the judge, after a solemn deliberation, set bail at an astronomical $200,000, she rose without a moment's hesitation and, with an almost theatrical flourish, produced a checkbook and penned the exorbitant sum. She'd refinanced her house, the bailiff later confided in me, his tone a mix of disbelief and pity, underscoring the astonishing depth of her denial and loyalty. While the judge readily granted my request for a restraining order, a small, cold part of me understood, with chilling clarity, that this mere piece of paper, for all its legal weight, would prove utterly ineffective in stopping Jasper if he truly harbored the intent to inflict further harm. Afterward, in the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway, his mother cornered me, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss, accusing me of destroying her son's life over nothing. I simply turned and walked away, choosing silence over a futile confrontation. For what rational words could I possibly offer to a woman who genuinely believed that systematically poisoning babies was, in her twisted perception, nothing? The following week, Elise, always practical and compassionate, gently suggested I consider attending a pregnancy loss support group that convened weekly on Tuesdays at the community center. I found myself sitting in that humble circle of somewhat worn, elastic-seated chairs, utterly paralyzed by the weight of my grief and trauma, for a full 20 minutes before I could even begin to articulate a single coherent word. But when I finally, painstakingly, uttered the raw, agonizing truth aloud, describing in stark detail what Jasper had done, a profound, palpable silence descended upon the room, thick with shared understanding and empathy. Then, a cascade of genuine human connection. One woman, her own eyes glistening with clenched hairs, began to weep softly, while another, without a word, simply reached across the space to gently hold my trembling hand. They believed me unequivocally and without question, a solace that, I realized with a pang, was far more than I could say for most people in my life. After the meeting concluded, 3 of those compassionate women, their faces etched with a shared knowing, offered me their phone numbers, urging me to call anytime, day or night. I carefully saved them in my phone, a small beacon of hope, but the emotional exhaustion was still too profound. I simply couldn't bring myself to reach out just yet. 4 days later, as I was navigating the bustling aisles of the grocery store, pushing my half-filled cart, the detective called again. This time, the news was a fresh wound. They had successfully obtained Sloane's phone records, a digital breadcrumb trail that unveiled hundreds, quite literally hundreds, of text messages exchanged between her and Jasper, all meticulously detailing their monstrous scheme revolving around the insurance money. It was irrefutable evidence that she had been privy to every horrific detail from the very beginning, actively collaborating and helping him meticulously plan each and every poisoning. The prosecutor, seizing the opportunity, had extended a deal to her, testify against Jasper, and receive a reduced sentence. Sloane, with a chilling lack of compunction, had accepted it immediately. No honor, no loyalty, apparently, even among the most heinous of accomplices. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I had to abandon my grocery cart right there in the cereal aisle, the colorful boxes blurring before my eyes, and retreat to the relative sanctuary of my car, where I sat in stunned disbelief for a full hour, struggling to process yet another layer of betrayal. The very next morning, attempting a fragile return to normalcy, I stopped at my usual coffee shop, a place that once represented comfort, for the first time since this entire nightmarish ordeal had begun. As I waited in line, a pregnant woman, blissfully unaware, was ordering at the counter, her hand gently resting on her visibly rounded belly, a universal gesture of maternal anticipation. In that instant, my chest seized up, a suffocating vice grip, and I found myself gasping, utterly unable to draw a proper breath. The walls of the cozy cafe seemed to begin closing in around me, my peripheral vision darkening ominously. Stumbling blindly, I somehow made it to my car, where I desperately clung to the breathing exercises Elise had so patiently taught me. Count to 4, breathing in, hold for 4. Out for 4. It took a grueling 15 minutes of focused, deliberate breathing before I felt sufficiently grounded, sufficiently present, to even attempt to drive home. That very afternoon, my lawyer, Vincent, called with news that ignited a primal urge within me to simply scream, a guttural release of pure frustration and outrage. Jasper, in a breathtaking display of audacious deceit, was now claiming that the microstone, the very drug he had used to poison me, had been legitimately prescribed to him by a doctor for his own supposed medical condition, some rare, obscure ailment that men supposedly needed it for. It was, quite frankly, utter and complete garbage, a transparent fabrication designed to deflect blame. Without missing a beat, Vincent and I spent the next 6 hours meticulously poring over every single medical record I possessed from the past 3 years, leaving no stone unturned. The damning truth was clear. Not a single prescription for that particular drug existed anywhere in my files. Vincent, his voice firm, informed me that we would now be compelled to subpoena Jasper's medical records to unequivocally expose his blatant lie. The following day, the insurance company called. Alicia's voice, brisk and entirely professional, was all business, conveying a stark, unyielding message. They were summarily denying all 4 of the claims Jasper had so audaciously filed. And furthermore, they were demanding immediate repayment of a staggering $32,000, plus accrued interest. But that wasn't all. On top of everything else, they were also initiating criminal charges against him for insurance fraud. She stressed, with grave emphasis, that they took fraud very seriously and intended to pursue this particular case to the fullest extent of the law. Good, I thought to myself. A grim satisfaction settling over me, let him face consequences from every conceivable direction. Let justice come for him from every angle. A week later, Zane, ever my steadfast companion, drove me back to the house, the place that had once been our shared sanctuary, now a contaminated crime scene, to pack my remaining belongings. I had been staying with him since that terrifying first night, and I simply couldn't postpone confronting the space any longer. The very moment I crossed the threshold into the kitchen, a violent tremor racked my entire body, an involuntary physical manifestation of the trauma embedded within those walls. This was the place where he had systematically poisoned me, morning after insidious morning, meticulously mixing that vile drug into my prenatal smoothies, all while feigning affection, kissing my forehead with a horrifying, calculated tenderness. The sickening realization, the visceral memory, overwhelmed me. I doubled over and retched into the sink, Zane's comforting hand a steady presence on my trembling back. We frantically grabbed only essential clothes and critical papers, abandoning everything else, every tangible memory of a life that was now utterly shattered. I simply could not bear to remain in those rooms where I had once been so genuinely happy and, in hindsight, so tragically, incredibly stupid. That very night, my phone began to erupt, blowing up with a torrent of messages from people I had once, in my profound naivete, considered friends. Jasper, in his twisted campaign of smear and deflection, had been actively posting on social media, painting a grotesque narrative of me having a mental breakdown and making up horrible lies. Predictably, some gullible individuals had swallowed his venomous narrative whole, sending me patronizing messages advising that I needed help. Others, devoid of any genuine compassion, merely craved gossip, prying for lurid details as if my suffering were mere entertainment. The final straw, the ultimate affront, came when I read one particularly callous post that declared I was obviously lying because what kind of husband would do something so evil? The sheer, infuriating disbelief, the collective gaslighting, was too much. In that moment, with a decisive click, I deleted every single social media account I possessed, severing those toxic digital ties. The following week, the prosecutor, demonstrating the meticulous rigor of the legal system, brought in a forensic toxicologist to thoroughly review my case. She spent a painstaking 3 hours, calmly and clinically explaining how the precise pattern of poisoning, the calculated timing and dosage, pointed unequivocally to careful, chilling premeditation. Each dose, she detailed, had been meticulously calculated, calibrated with cold precision not merely to harm, but specifically to end the pregnancy to destroy our unborn child while simultaneously ensuring that I, the mother, remained alive. This horrifyingly specific intent, she underscored, would have demanded a very particular and extensive medical knowledge, making the act even more monstrously deliberate. The chilling precision of the perpetrator's actions became terrifyingly clear. The deliberate spacing between each poisoning was meticulously engineered, crafted to mimic the tragic, unpredictable rhythm of natural miscarriages. She asserted with grim certainty that whoever orchestrated this heinous act possessed a profound, almost sinister, understanding of human physiology and psychological manipulation. Knowing precisely how to disguise their malicious intent as a cruel twist of fate, nothing more than devastatingly bad luck. Every chilling detail, every damning statement, was carefully recorded by the prosecutor, his pen scratching methodically, building an irrefutable case for the impending trial. Just 2 short weeks later, the world felt a million miles away, and I was physically forcing boxes, heavy with the remnants of a shattered life, into the rear of Zane's pickup truck. The sky wept relentlessly, a steady, chilling rain that quickly soaked through my thin jacket, clinging to my skin and mirroring the dampness in my soul. My new sanctuary, if it could even be called that, was an apartment I'd hastily secured clear across town, nestled in a decrepit building that exuded the stale, musty odor of ancient, forgotten carpet. Above, the ceiling bore the telltale Rorschach patterns of past leaks, unsettling water stains that seemed to map out old sorrows. Zane, ever the pillar of quiet strength, hoisted my bulky couch, a piece of furniture laden with too many memories, up 3 seemingly endless flights of stairs. He did so without a single word of complaint, though I could clearly see the crimson flush spreading across his face, a testament to the sheer physical exertion. We moved through the apartment, assembling and arranging, enveloped by a heavy, almost suffocating silence. This quiet wasn't just practical, it was born of a shared, unspoken burden. Every time he attempted to break the stillness, a nascent word catching in his throat, his voice would betray him, cracking with an emotional fragility that sent him immediately looking away. Unable to meet my gaze, it was as if the weight of his unsaid words, perhaps his regret, was too heavy to carry. Once the bed frame, the final piece of our makeshift sanctuary, was finally assembled, Zane collapsed onto the bare floor, his exhaustion palpable. He sat there, hunched, his eyes fixed intently on his hands as if searching for answers in their callous lines. His mouth would open, then close, a silent struggle playing out on his face, a silent scream of words trapped behind locked lips. It was a torturous dance of wanting to speak, of needing to confess, yet being utterly paralyzed by the enormity of it. Finally, with a visible heave of his chest and a forced exhalation, the words were wrestled free. He confessed, his voice barely a whisper, that he should have spoken up, should have warned me, the moment he witnessed Jasper and Sloane together. Their casual closeness a precursor to the devastating betrayal. I immediately tried to assuage his profound self-reproach, my words a gentle attempt to entangle the knot of guilt constricting him. It wasn't your fault, Zane, I insisted, but he merely shook his head, a grim, determined gesture of denial. No, he countered, his voice raw with self-condemnation. I was a coward. The weight of his guilt was a palpable thing. An oppressive burden that manifested in a flurry of early text messages, a constant, almost frantic need to check in, to ensure I was alright, to atone in some small way, to bring some semblance of normalcy, to create boundaries that protected both of us from the suffocating grip of his remorse. We painstakingly established a set of rules, guidelines about how frequently he could reach out, a delicate negotiation between his need to connect and my need for space. The very next morning, the fragile peace was shattered by the ringing of my phone. It was Vincent, his tone crisp and businesslike, relaying the unsurprising news. Jasper's lawyer had reached out, seeking a meeting to discuss a plea deal. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, but I pushed through it, driving across the city to Vincent's office. His workspace was a veritable shrine to his formidable career. The walls were a meticulously curated gallery, adorned with a formidable collection of framed law degrees from prestigious institutions and an array of photographs capturing him in firm handshakes with a succession of stern-faced, undeniably important-looking dignitaries and legal figures, each image radiating an aura of unwavering authority. Across the polished mahogany table sat Jasper's lawyer, a man with a perpetually furrowed brow, a thick folder bursting with meticulously organized papers resting squarely before him. He launched into his rehearsed spiel, a dispassionate recital of potential reduced charges. Contingent upon my agreement to forego any civil suit for damages, a transparent attempt to mitigate the financial fallout for his client. Vincent, a master of strategic silence, listened intently, his expression unreadable, not a single muscle twitching. Only after the lawyer had finished his proposal did Vincent slowly lean back in his ergonomic chair, a subtle shift that conveyed unwavering confidence. He then spoke, his voice measured and calm, yet imbued with an ironclad certainty, informing the lawyer that the sheer volume and compelling nature of the evidence against Jasper was simply too overwhelming, too irrefutable, for us to even contemplate such a paltry deal. Undeterred, Jasper's lawyer persisted, his voice taking on a desperate edge, suggesting a ludicrous proposition. Jasper would agree to plead guilty to a mere simple assault charge, effectively minimizing the heinous act of methodical poisoning. At this, Vincent, a man not easily swayed, let out a short, incredulous laugh, a sharp, dismissive sound that cut through the strained atmosphere. The grand jury, he stated, his amusement barely concealed, would never, in a million years, accept such a transparently absurd recharacterization of the facts. Just 3 days after that utterly fruitless meeting, I found myself stealing for another confrontation, this time for the divorce mediation. It was held in a sterile, impersonal conference room, high above the bustling streets, offering a panoramic, almost mocking, view of the sprawling city, a stark contrast to the small, intimate dramas playing out within its walls. At the opposite end of the long, unforgiving table, Jasper sat, a gaunt shadow of his former self. His face, once smug and confident, was now noticeably thinner, itched with an unhealthy pallor, and pronounced dark circles set heavily beneath his eyes, broadcasting his recent travails to the world. His lawyer, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation, began droning on, reading methodically from prepared notes detailing their proposed division of marital assets. Then, with an almost unbelievable audacity, Jasper's lawyer uttered words that instantly chilled the air. Since I made more money than Jasper, he pronounced, I should pay him support, the share. Unmitigated gall of it. It was an insult draped in legal jargon. The injustice of the statement was so profound, so utterly outrageous, that my lawyer, Cyrus, reacted with an explosive speed that belied his calm demeanor. He shot to his feet so abruptly that his chair, caught in the sudden momentum, careened backward with a loud screech, slamming against the conference room wall with a resounding thud. Cyrus, my steadfast advocate, standing up so swiftly that the violent clatter of his chair against the wall echoed through the room, that, I realized, was a lawyer who understood the precise moment to unleash genuine, righteous anger. It wasn't theatrics. It was a visceral reaction to an unforgivable affront. How, I wondered, my mind reeling, could anyone with a shred of decency or logic even dare to propose that the victim, the one who endured the calculated suffering, should now be financially beholden to her poisoner? It was an inversion of justice so grotesque it defied comprehension. Without missing a beat, Cyrus, already in motion, dramatically produced a neatly organized stack of tax returns, meticulously documented proof that instantly dismantled their flimsy arguments. He laid them out, highlighting the indisputable fact that I had only surpassed Jasper's earnings in the last 2 years, a mere blip in the grand scheme. Before that, for a full 5 years, it was Jasper who had consistently been the high earner. But Cyrus wasn't finished. He then unleashed the coup de grace, revealing the extent of Jasper's insidious deceit. He had been systematically stealing from me through an elaborate scheme of insurance fraud, leaving my resources dry. The revelation made any claim for support from him not just unfair, but utterly, demonstrably ludicrous, a financial insult added to a profound personal injury. Jasper's lawyer, visibly floundering, attempted a feeble rebuttal, but Cyrus, a legal maestro in full stride, simply wasn't having it. He systematically, almost surgically, shut him down, unleashing a barrage of irrefutable case law and legal precedents that left no room for debate. The opposing counsel was cornered, outmaneuvered, and utterly defeated. With no viable counter-argument, they were forced, with palpable reluctance, to completely withdraw their audacious request for spousal support. The following Monday, I attempted to return to a semblance of normalcy, trudging back to work. But the pretense was short-lived. I could only manage half days, my mind a fractured landscape where focus was an elusive mirage. My concentration, once sharp, was now a tattered veil, unable to grasp anything for more than fleeting moments. It was a heartbreaking decline. I found myself repeatedly, frustratingly making egregious mistakes on routine reports, documents I had meticulously prepared hundreds of times before, almost instinctively. The simplest data entry felt like solving a complex puzzle. One particularly devastating afternoon, after I accidentally sent a sensitive email to an entirely wrong client list, the dam broke. My supervisor, a kind woman named Eleanor, discovered me hunched over in the quiet sanctuary of the bathroom stall, tears streaming silently down my face, shoulders shaking with uncontrolled sobs. She offered gentle words of reassurance, urging me to take my time, emphasizing that everyone understood what I was going through, a blanket of sympathy that, while appreciated, did little to soothe the cold, hard dread gripping me. Deep down, an undeniable, gut-wrenching truth had settled. My career, the one I had painstakingly built, was effectively over. How could I possibly function when I couldn't concentrate long enough to complete even the most elementary tasks? The physical manifestations of my trauma were relentless. My hands, once steady and precise, would tremble uncontrollably the moment I attempted to type, transforming the keyboard into an insurmountable obstacle. And my memory, once reliable, had become a sieve. I'd frequently lose my train of thought, forgetting what I was in the middle of doing, leaving projects suspended in an abyss of confusion. Just a week after these demoralizing professional setbacks, the phone rang again. It was Vincent, his voice carrying the weight of a pivotal development. Sloan, I learned, had finally taken a deal with the prosecution. And when Vincent said everything, he meant it. Sloan, in a desperate bid for leniency, had laid bare the full, chilling extent of their depravity. She surrendered a trove of damning evidence, including text messages so cold and calculating they felt like a punch to the gut. In them, Jasper referred to our unborn children not as precious lives, but as mere financial opportunities, meticulously calculating the exact monetary value each miscarriage would yield. She presented messages detailing his insidious planning, precisely when to administer the poison, timing it with my menstrual cycle to maximize the illusion of natural miscarriages. There were even emails, a horrifying glimpse into their shared, callous future, discussing apartment listings, dream furniture, and how they had brazenly used the ill-gotten insurance money for deposits and furnishings, building their future on the ashes of my shattered hopes. But the most visceral, soul-crushing revelation came in the form of recorded phone calls. In them, Jasper's voice, laced with cruel amusement, could be heard laughing about how I, his unsuspecting victim, was blaming myself, drowning in guilt for the miscarriages he had so callously orchestrated. It was a betrayal beyond words, a venomous echo that twisted the knife in my already bleeding heart. Vincent, his voice tight with grim satisfaction, confirmed that Sloan's testimony, with its undeniable proof of calculated cruelty and meticulous planning, was nothing short of devastating. It was, he assured me, the kind of evidence that would practically guarantee a swift and decisive conviction. The absolute nadir of this agonizing journey arrived when I was summoned to the prosecutor's office, tasked with the excruciating duty of identifying evidence. The sterile, impersonal environment of the room, with its fluorescent lights and beige walls, only amplified the horror. One by one, they presented clear plastic bags, each containing a precious, heartbreaking relic, the baby blankets I had painstakingly knitted, each stitch a prayer, a whisper of hope for a future that would never be. The bright yellow one, destined for Phoenix, still held the metal knitting needles, frozen mid-row, exactly where I had optimistically paused. The soft green blanket, meant for Sage, was agonizingly close to completion, needing only its final border. The vibrant purple one, started with such tender anticipation for indigo, was barely more than a swatch, just a few inches of nascent warmth. And then there was the serene blue one, complete and perfect, crafted for Xavier. A crushing wave of memory washed over me. I distinctly recalled carefully wrapping it in delicate tissue paper, my heart brimming with a desperate, fragile optimism, thinking, maybe this time we'll finally get to use it. When the prosecutor, his voice gentle but firm, asked me to confirm if these heartbreaking artifacts were indeed mine, I could barely force the single, choked syllable of yes past the lump in my throat. My voice was a fragile whisper, a threadbare echo of my shattered self. Then, they brought out the pregnancy journals, my most private chronicles, filled with intimate notes about symptoms, the first flutterings of life, and boundless hopes and dreams meticulously recorded for each unborn baby. To see all of these deeply personal, profoundly hopeful symbols of motherhood now encased in plastic, starkly labeled as evidence with cold, impersonal case numbers affixed to them, was a realization that hit me like a physical blow. It was in that moment, with searing clarity, that I understood the devastating truth. Those babies, once living hopes, would never be anything more, in the eyes of the law, than mere exhibits in a brutal criminal case. A grueling 2 weeks later, the grand jury finally convened. That same afternoon, Vincent's call brought news that was both a relief and a chilling confirmation. They had formally indicted Jasper on all charges. The gravity of his situation was immense. He was now facing a formidable array of accusations, including assault with poison, a charge that underscored the malicious premeditation of his acts alongside insurance fraud and severe domestic violence charges. Together, these could potentially send him to prison for a staggering 20 years, a lifetime in confinement. Vincent, his voice tinged with professional satisfaction, declared it one of the strongest cases he had ever encountered, attributing its robustness to the overwhelming, meticulously detailed evidence brought forth in Sloan's comprehensive testimony. Yet, ever the pragmatist, he tempered the victory with a crucial warning: trials, he cautioned, were inherently unpredictable, labyrinthine battles. And Jasper's defense lawyer would undoubtedly deploy every trick in the book, every legal maneuver, to sow seeds of doubt. He stressed the imperative to brace ourselves for a long, arduous fight, a protracted legal war. Moreover, he sagely advised that Jasper, as the trial date loomed closer, might very well make another desperate attempt to secure a plea deal, helping to escape the full brunt of justice. The very next week, amidst this whirlwind of legal proceedings and emotional wreckage, I kept an appointment that felt like a fragile thread of hope, or perhaps a lingering phantom limb of my former self. I was back in the hushed, clinical environment of my fertility doctor's office, sitting in that familiar, uncomfortable chair. Dr. Evans, her expression a mix of professional resolve and quiet empathy, began running a series of tests. A battery of comprehensive tests followed, meticulously designed to ascertain the full extent of the damage the insidious medicine had inflicted upon my body. The results, when they finally came back, were a confusing tapestry of hope and despair, a truly mixed bag. They confirmed some scarring, a tangible mark of what I had endured, yet mercifully not complete, irreversible infertility. The doctor, her voice gentle but firm, told me I might still be able to conceive and carry children. A fragile promise in the wreckage of my recent past. However, she strongly advised a minimum waiting period of 1 year, a crucial time to allow my body to physically recover and rebuild. Beyond the physical, she emphasized that the deep emotional trauma I had experienced demanded an equally long, if not longer, period for processing and healing before I could even contemplate trying again. As I left her sterile office, I felt a pervasive numbness, a hollow echo where my emotions used to be. The profound question lingered. After everything, the betrayal, the pain, the profound loss, would I ever truly want to try again? Was that hope still alive within me, or had it been extinguished by the flames of grief and anger? Amidst the soul-crushing bureaucracy of legal proceedings and the relentless weight of everything that had transpired, an unsettling new development began to unfold. My mailbox, usually filled with mundane bills, started receiving unfamiliar correspondence, crisp envelopes containing credit card statements for accounts I had no recollection of ever opening, each one bearing a shocking balance amounting to thousands of dollars. A cold dread seeped into my bones as I frantically called the respective credit card companies, only to be met with the chilling confirmation. These cards, with their skyrocketing debts, were indeed opened in my name, utilizing my social security number. The detailed charges, laid out in stark print, revealed a cavalcade of purchases, glittering jewelry, high-end electronics, and substantial cash advances, all cumulatively totaling an astronomical $30,000. I gathered every single piece of damning evidence and presented it to Cyrus, my lawyer, who immediately filed extensive fraud paperwork. Yet, even as he acted, his face was grim, warning me that resolving this tangled mess would likely consume months, possibly even a year. And there was a very real chance I might be forced to make interim payments while we battled the fraudulent claims. True to his word, Cyrus painstakingly uncovered the forged applications, each one bearing my crudely imitated signature, all meticulously crafted by Jasper. He submitted this irrefutable proof to the credit companies, but their bureaucratic wheels turned with agonizing slowness, extending my torment. Then, yesterday morning, a shocking sight greeted me at work. Perched conspicuously on my desk was a monumental flower arrangement, a vibrant, almost aggressive display of lilac and roses. Tucked amidst the blooms was a small card, and my stomach churned as I recognized Jasper's unmistakable handwriting, a desperate, sickening scrawl begging for forgiveness. Security camera footage quickly confirmed the delivery person, but, frustratingly, offered no clue as to who had placed the order. I immediately contacted the police to report what felt like a blatant violation of the restraining order, a chilling reminder of his persistent presence. However, their response was an infuriating echo of helplessness, without definitive proof that Jasper himself ordered them. Mom, we can only issue a warning. The systemic loophole left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. After work, security personnel, observing my palpable distress, kindly walked me to my car, promising to maintain a vigilant watch for any further unwanted deliveries. The ostentatious bouquet went straight into the nearest dumpster, a cathartic, furious arc. Yet, even after scrubbing my hands 5 times, the cloying, sweet scent of those flowers seemed to cling to my skin, an unwelcome phantom. 6 interminable months crawled by, each day a slow, arduous journey. Then, one quiet evening, I found myself in the solitude of my apartment, my hands trembling slightly as I carefully lit 4 small candles. It would have been Indigo's first birthday. The comforting, warm vanilla scent of the candles began to gently fill my living room, weaving through the air as I sat cross-legged on the floor, whispering each precious name aloud for the flickering flames: Phoenix, Sage, Indigo, and Xavier. Setting up the last candle, my hands betrayed the fragile composure I so desperately clung to, shaking almost uncontrollably. But with a profound, almost defiant effort, I managed to sing happy birthday from beginning to end, my voice a quiet tremor, without completely shattering into a million pieces. A small and touch cake sat on my coffee table, a poignant symbol of what might have been. Beside it were 4 tiny, neatly wrapped boxes, each one containing a pair of impossibly small baby socks, items I had bought in a moment of overwhelming tenderness and grief, unable to resist the pull of what should have been. One by one, I blew out each candle, a silent, solemn ritual, and whispered their names into the tendrils of smoke curling gently upwards, as if sending my love directly to them. 2 weeks later, the final divorce papers arrived, stark and definitive. My lawyer, Vincent, meticulously explained how Jasper's string of heinous criminal actions had triggered the most stringent clauses of our prenup, ensuring a profoundly different outcome than he could have ever anticipated. The terms were unequivocal. I retained the house, both cars, our joint savings, and all retirement accounts. Jasper, on the other hand, was left with nothing but the crushing burden of over $40,000 in legal fees. The paperwork itself was a stark narrative, his signature, scrawled shakily and unevenly, a testament to his incarceration in county jail. My own signature, by contrast, was firm and clear, a decisive mark of my newfound autonomy. I went straight home and, with a sense of resolute finality, changed every single lock, a symbolic act of reclaiming my space, even though, in reality, he was still safely behind bars. 3 months further into this new, unsettling chapter, I found myself in a cold, austere room at the courthouse. an unnerving silence pressing in as I awaited my turn to testify before the grand jury. They demanded I recount each miscarriage in agonizing detail, the raw memories torn open, while Jasper sat a mere 20 feet away, clad in his bright orange jumpsuit, his eyes fixed on me. A predatory gaze I felt even through my resolve. His lawyer, a relentless and calculated figure, kept interjecting, peppering me with aggressive questions about specific dates and times, clearly attempting to sow doubt, to make me appear confused. Or worse, to imply I was fabricating the truth, but I was prepared. I pulled out my journal, a meticulous record of my suffering, where every agonizing detail had been painstakingly documented. I read the entries aloud, word for word, the debilitating cramping, the terrifying bleeding, the frantic emergency room visits, the invasive DNC procedures. When his lawyer, in a final, desperate attempt, dared to suggest that perhaps the miscarriages were natural, an act of nature, I simply pointed a steady finger at the prescription bottle, the irrefutable piece of evidence, and in a voice that was surprisingly calm, I challenged him, then perhaps you can explain why abortion medication was found mixed into my prenatal vitamins. The grand jury, confronted with such undeniable truth, indicted him on all charges within the hour, a swift and decisive victory that felt, for a fleeting moment, like justice. The very next week, Elise, my victim advocate, met me at her office, her presence a comforting anchor. Her mission, to help me craft my victim impact statement for the upcoming sentencing. She had a box of tissues thoughtfully placed within reach, and a small recorder ready, knowing that sometimes, when the emotions became too overwhelming and my hands too shaky, speaking the words aloud would be easier than trying to write them. In that quiet room, I gave voice to my grief, naming each precious baby, Phoenix, Sage, Indigo, and Xavier. I described, with heartbreaking clarity, the nurseries I had started planning, not once, but for different times, each a fragile dream shattered. I spoke of the tiny baby clothes, still hidden away in my closet, objects imbued with such profound longing that I simply couldn't bring myself to donate them. And, with a quiet strength, I mentioned the stretch marks etched onto my stomach, undeniable physical proof that those pregnancies were real, tangible. Despite Jasper's twisted attempts to erase their existence, to invalidate my suffering. We practiced reading the statement together, again and again, until I could articulate my pain without my voice completely breaking, each run through a small, agonizing triumph of composure. A month later, the news of the plea deal came through Vincent's office, and when I heard the details, a mere 5 years with the possibility of parole in just 3 a raw. Guttural scream tore from me. I hurled my phone across the room, the anger of physical force. Vincent, his voice tinny and distant on speaker, tried to rationalize it, explaining that, legally, it was actually a good outcome for a poisoning case where, according to the letter of the law, the victims had technically never drawn breath. His clinical detachment was a fresh wound. They were real babies to me, I screamed, the words choked with tears and fury, before violently hanging up on him. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks after that, in a courtroom packed to capacity, buzzing with morbid curiosity. I stood before the judge, my voice steady, and read my statement, pouring out the anguish of a mother whose children had been stolen. In the gallery, Jasper's mother wailed dramatically, a theatrical display of performative grief, while his sister glared at me, her eyes shooting daggers of pure hatred. The judge listened, nodding along, acknowledging my profound pain but explaining, with a detached professionalism, that he was bound to uphold the plea agreement accepted by the prosecution. When Jasper finally stood, he mumbled something barely audible about being sorry, but the judge, his patience clearly exhausted, cut him off mid-sentence, telling him curtly to save it. I walked out of that courtroom feeling utterly empty, the hollow victory offering no solace, as his family's furious shouts followed me, accusing me of ruining his life. That very same week, my lawyer filed a civil suit for emotional distress and battery, a separate legal battle to address the intangible wounds. He warned me, his voice practical, that it would likely drag on for years, and given Jasper's impending incarceration, I'd probably never see a penny from him. Yet, I signed the papers without hesitation. It wasn't about the money. It was about permanence, about ensuring that a public, legal record of his monstrous actions would exist forever. Surprisingly, the insurance company moved with far greater speed and efficiency in their own lawsuit, ultimately winning a judgment of $50,000, including significant penalties and interest, a debt that Jasper would owe the moment he was released. Their lawyer, beaming with satisfaction, declared it a slam dunk case of insurance fraud, confidently asserting that they would garnish any wages he ever earned. It was a small comfort, a victory of sorts. But it did little to fill the aching emptiness that remained, the profound silence of my arms, which stayed painfully empty every single night. 6 months into his sentence, a flicker of purpose ignited within me. I began volunteering with a domestic violence support group, stepping into rooms full of women who, like me, bore the scars of unseen battles, their eyes reflecting stories of resilience and pain. I started telling my story, not as a victim, but as a survivor, sharing my truth with those who, their heads, etched with a shared, silent understanding, nodded in collective recognition, their eyes mirroring the profound empathy and dawning awareness that rippled through the room. Some among them bore visible badges of their suffering bruises blooming on skin, obvious physical tolls, but countless others carried invisible wounds, just like the deep, silent scars etched on my own soul, inflicted by partners who had mastered creative, insidious ways to control, manipulate, and ultimately harm them. The coordinator, her voice firm yet compassionate, had unequivocally stated that reproductive coercion, a silent epidemic of control, was shockingly more prevalent and tragically underestimated than most people ever truly grasped. My story, raw and vulnerable, had unexpectedly become a crucial catalyst, helping these women, some perhaps for the first time, to finally recognize the subtle yet devastating signs within their own lives. A poignant example materialized immediately. One woman, her face tear-streaked and trembling, approached me afterward, her confession spelling out in a rush of anguish and relief. Her husband, she revealed, had been secretly tampering with her birth control for months, causing her to doubt her own sanity, making her believe she was, quite literally, going crazy. A full, arduous year had passed since that first agonizing moment, imprinted forever in my memory, with Zane gently holding up the prescription bottle at turning point, though I hadn't known it then. Now, I sat in Elisa's soothing office for our regular monthly session. The debilitating panic attacks, once a relentless daily torment that seized me without warning, had mercifully receded, now perhaps surfacing only once a week. Usually triggered by the innocent sight of a baby commercial on television or a joyous pregnancy announcement innocently scrolling across my social media feed, I had bravely returned to work full-time, even embracing the demanding promotion I had previously, perhaps understandably, turned down, burying myself in exhausting 12-hour days. A strategic maneuver to keep my mind relentlessly occupied and the painful memories at bay. My co-workers, who had once tiptoed around me, unsure of how to navigate my grief, had slowly stopped walking on eggshells. I could now make it through most days, a small victory in itself, without the overwhelming urge to retreat to the bathroom and weep uncontrollably. Though the grocery store baby aisle remained a treacherous emotional minefield, capable of making me abandon my cart mid-shop and bolt for the parking lot in a sudden, desperate rush, Elise, my therapist, assured me this was a perfectly normal reaction, a wound that might never fully, perfectly heal. I had even cautiously started dating again. These were mostly tentative coffee meetings, light and non-committal, none of which ever truly progressed anywhere substantial, for I knew, inevitably, I would eventually have to explain the involuntary flinch, the subtle recoil, that seized me when they innocently mentioned wanting kids someday. How does a human being, I often wondered, so coldly, so calculatedly document their own evil? Those chilling texts from Jasper, where he casually referred to our unborn babies, our future children, as mere financial opportunities, did he type those words? Those utterly devoid of humanity phrases, without any shred of feeling at all, his mind merely calculating numbers and potential gains while I, in blissful ignorance, was still dreaming of holding them close. The crushing weight of grief hadn't miraculously diminished in size or intensity, but I had, through sheer force of will and consistent effort, grown immeasurably better at carrying it, like a heavy, cumbersome backpack I had slowly, painstakingly learned to balance and manage while navigating the everyday terrain of life. Zane, a steadfast pillar of quiet support, had started coming over on Thursday evenings to watch basketball games. We'd order comforting Chinese food. A simple ritual that offered a fragile sense of normalcy. Crucially, though, he had stopped trying to fix everything or profusely apologize every 5 minutes. A well-meaning but often overwhelming habit from those first few tender months. He had thoughtfully established clear, respectful rules for himself. Always texting before coming over, never staying past 10 p.m., and, most importantly, never bringing up Jasper unless I initiated the conversation first. These boundaries, carefully constructed, helped us to tentatively rediscover a connection that felt almost, if not entirely, normal again. The harsh reality of the outside world intruded one afternoon while I was diligently sorting through a daunting pile of medical bills. The prison called, the voice on the other end clinically relaying the news. Jasper had been attacked by another inmate and was currently in the infirmary, suffering from broken ribs and a fractured jaw. I simply hung up the phone, the receiver clicking into place with a definitive thud, without asking if he was okay. Then, with a strange, unsettling detachment, I returned to sorting papers, waiting, almost expecting, to feel something anything. But there was just this vast, echoing empty space where caring, or even any flicker of concern, used to reside. My boss, sensing the profound need for a fresh start, gently pulled me aside the following week and offered me a transfer. A move to the marketing department in the East Building. A world away where no one knew my harrowing story, where I wouldn't have to navigate the break room where Sloan, my former friend, used to eat lunch, or walk past Jasper's old, haunting office every single day. That Friday, I meticulously packed my desk, a symbolic shedding of the past, and moved everything to a new cubicle with a coveted window view of the parking lot, a neutral landscape. Instead of the courtyard where Jasper and I used to share lunches, now a painful tableau of vanished memories. Elise, ever the gentle motivator, eventually convinced me to meet someone for coffee. Just coffee, she had insisted, her voice reassuring, with a guy from her book club who knows your situation but still genuinely wants to meet you. I lasted a mere 20 minutes before a sudden, visceral trigger seized me, making me invent a desperate excuse about a work emergency. His cologne, a seemingly innocuous scent, had instantly, overwhelmingly reminded me of the aftershave Jasper had worn to our wedding. The memory, sharp and unwelcome, sent a wave of nausea crashing over me. I threw up in the restaurant bathroom, my body reacting before my mind could process, before driving myself home in a daze. Later, while I was carefully planting vibrant tomato seedlings in my new garden, Baden nascent symbol of hope and growth, lawyer called. She informed me that the civil suit had finally settled for $75,000, money I'd probably never actually see. Yet, there was a small, significant victory. At least now, a concrete legal document existed, unequivocally stating that Jasper could never contact me again. Not even after his prison sentence concluded. I drove to the nursery and bought 4 small, hardy trees, carefully selecting each one. I planted them along the back fence, a silent, living memorial, one for each baby. Then, I painstakingly wrote their names on smooth river rocks, placing one at the base of each young trunk. Phoenix received the apple tree, for we had once, in happier times, spoken of picking apples with our children someday. Sage was given the sturdy oak, symbolizing strength and resilience. Indigo received the delicate cherry tree, a poignant nod to beauty. And Xavier, for whom we had tried the hardest in the vibrant season of fall, was given the resilient maple. I watered them faithfully every morning before work, diligently pulling weeds on weekends, and sometimes I would simply sit on the cool grass between them, quietly reading the pregnancy loss books Elise continued to bring me. A reporter from the state paper left 3 insistent voicemails eager to do a feature story on reproductive coercion and insurance fraud. But I deleted each message without a second thought, without ever calling back. I refused to become the cautionary tale, the stark warning splashed across someone's Sunday morning coffee reading, a public spectacle of my deepest pain. The anniversary, a date forever etched in my calendar, arrived on a Tuesday. I took the day off work, choosing instead to sit quietly in my garden, amidst the nascent growth of the trees that were just beginning to unfold new leaves, new life. In that tranquil space, a profound realization washed over me. I had survived something that, by all accounts, should have utterly, irrevocably destroyed me. I wasn't grateful for finding a strength I never wanted to need, nor was I proud of surviving a tragedy that never should have occurred. But I was still here, still breathing, still, against all odds, getting up each morning to water for precious trees and go to work. And sometimes, almost miraculously, I could even find myself laughing at Zane's wonderfully terrible jokes during basketball games. The poison Jasper had systematically fed me for 2 agonizing years hadn't managed to kill me, even though it had tragically, irrevocably killed our babies. And on some days, against the backdrop of all the loss, that, in itself, felt like its own distinct kind of victory, even if it was a victory I had never, in my wildest dreams, ever wanted to win. Really appreciate you hanging out with me today. It's been fascinating to just explore and wonder about all this together. Hope to catch you again soon. Like the video. It helps more than you think.